Thank you. Thank especially Nancy Diener, who this was going to be kind of something to be shared with the Board of Camp and Retreat Ministries, and we talked about what it was, and she said, do you have any problem with opening it up to other people? I said, no, fine. And so you're the other people. Really glad to have you with us. Let's begin this morning with a word of prayer. Gracious and loving God, thank you for this time and for this place. Thank you for this day and this fellowship. Time when we can come together, be together, learn together, and think together about how we can be most faithful in serving you and serving your church. Lord, we ask your blessing on this time, that we might be as fully present to you as you are present with us. Lord, we do give you our thanks and praise, and it is with a grateful heart that we offer our prayers. In Jesus' name, amen. And so I've been kind of traveling around the state and doing this, and wanted to share this part on the trends and demographics. This is kind of near and dear to my heart. For 14 years I was at the Board of Discipleship in Nashville, and for the last 7 years I was the director of the research office. And so I came here and decided to kind of focus just on Wisconsin and do some of the things in Wisconsin that I had done for the national church. One of the benefits I have is I am still a consultant to the U.S. Census Bureau on the census research, which kind of sounds more impressive than it is. I think there are like 4,000 of us who have access to the data. So I've had the opportunity to look at the data specific to the state of Wisconsin, trends as we're moving into the future, and this is a look at and a projection forward of what kinds of shifts and changes will be happening over the next 25 years. So this is a period from 2010 to 2035. And out of the work that I've done thus far, I have found 7 things that I think are going to be significant. So we're going to look at those 7 areas. And there are a few things I want to say as I start the time together. These are just kind of disclaimers at the outset. First thing is, trends are fickle. We're going to talk about trajectories. We're going to talk about possibilities. We're going to talk about what might be based on good evidence. But trends change and new things can come along, and everything we thought was going to happen changes overnight. If I go back and look at local church strategic plans, no plan that was developed in 2006 or 2007 anticipated the economic downturn of 2008. And that changed everything. So there are significant occurrences that can change everything. Demographics are deceiving. Demographics are information, not knowledge. And the distinction I make there is information doesn't tell you really anything. Information tells you what you need to look at, what you need to confirm, what you need to identify. You may hear that a significant shift in a population is happening in your area. That population and demographics is a broad, generalized group of people that you don't really know anything about. If you hear that we're going to have a 15% increase in the Hispanic Latino population in the next 5 years, what do you know based on that? You don't know anything. What you know is there are a lot of questions you need to ask and answer before you can make any decisions. And too often we make decisions based on demographics rather than making decisions based on knowledge. And we're going to talk more about that, and I'll illustrate what I mean by that as we go forward. Planning is more art than science. Everyone, especially United Methodists, want the formula to follow. We want the 7 keys, the 12 steps, the 40 days. We want something that will take us from here to here, that we can just check off the list as we move down. There is a key learning in planning. And that is, in planning, there is no such thing as a straight line. How many things in your life go exactly the way you expect them to? When you get a group of people together, multiply that by X. So when we're planning how we can move forward, we're planning what we want to do in a culture that's defined by variables, that's defined by change. Planning needs to be more art than science. There's not one right way to do planning for the future. And also, the mistake that I see that we've made in the United Methodist Church is many churches seem to do planning in order to get another binder. What ends up in the binder isn't really your plan. Or if it is your plan, it's probably still on the shelf. Planning is a dynamic process of constant adjustment and readjustment as we move forward. And so, the less we formalize, the less we put on paper, the less we set in stone, the more effective our plans can be. And so we need to break away from that idea that if we can just get really cool 4-color charts in a binder, we've got a good plan to work from. Most people plan for the past rather than the future. It is hard to envision something we haven't seen before. And so we will get a group of people together to plan for the church. And they start planning, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a Sunday school like we had in the 70s? Wouldn't it be great if we could get as many people in worship as we used to get at Christmas and Easter, where we had to set up the chairs in the aisles? And so we do all this planning to get us back to what we used to be, instead of really looking forward to say, what does God need us to be as we're moving into the future? What's our new reality? What's the story that we're going to be writing for the future, not just reviewing the story that's already been written? And dreaming is not the same as visioning. Guessing is not the same as planning. One of the things that I've noticed, and we'll talk more about this in a moment. I'll go into a church today in a community where the population of children, population of youth, population of young families has all decreased. The church has a Sunday school that meets maybe 2 or 3 times a year when the grandkid shows up. They don't have the resources, they don't have the energy, they don't have the time, and so I ask, okay, what do you really want to see happen in your church to turn it around? We want young families. We want to build a big Sunday school. How many of your churches would say, we want to attract young people and have a big Sunday school? Yeah, that's what I thought. Dreaming is not the same as visioning. We need to know who's out there. We need to know our context. We need to know our strengths, what our possibilities are, and build from that. Not just hope that we can have something or wish that we could have something. We need to really do some hard work to identify what's realistic and how can we faithfully use what God has given us, our resources, our strengths, our gifts, our reality to be effective in ministry. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward too. Through this time, please, as we move forward, I'm going to be throwing some information at you. I'm going to be asking you periodically to kind of turn and ask the so what question. If this is true, if we're heading this way, what does it mean to us? If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have illustrations that either support or refute this, please share them. I want to say to you again, this is a look at where things seem to be headed. If you disagree with what you see, that's fine. I don't know that this is true. but I believe there's some really important information here that can help us as we think about what kind of church can we be as we move deeper into the 21st century. Strategy and tactics. I want to also share with you my process, so you kind of see my bias in the way I do planning and look at planning. I see that really effective planning has three aspects, or three phases. The first is strategic thinking. Without even asking how, before we get to the how, we need to have some very, very deep conversation about what. What is it that we believe God is calling us to do? What is it that we think God wants us to be? And why? Why is this important? This needs to be looking at the big picture, exploring all the options, putting everything we already do out on the table, and really being open and honest at clarifying who we are, what we have to work with, and what the opportunities are that are really ours to begin to explore. Then, through that process, we identify what are our missional priorities. Why are we here? What is it that we really want to achieve? What are our specific goals and objectives? All of that needs to be defined before we ever start having the conversation, and how will we do that? So getting that clarity about the what and the why is the strategic thinking phase. Strategic planning, then, is saying, all right, this is where we are today. This is where we believe God is calling us to go in the future. What kind of bridge, what kind of path, what kind of process moves us from here to here? What are the things we're going to have to put in place? What are the things we're going to have to learn? What are the things we're going to have to develop that will allow us to go from here to here? And at the same time, and this one's hard in the church, what do we need to let go of? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to unlearn to free up the capacity and the energy that will allow us to head off of the status quo and move in a new direction? And so this is creating the structures and processes that will move us forward and allow us to achieve our goals and objectives, to stay focused on our missional priorities. Once we have then the basic structure, this is when we move into tactical planning. What's the implementation plan? Who's going to be responsible? How are they going to do their work? What's the accountability? What are the costs? How are we going to evaluate effectiveness? And who's going to be responsible for making the adjustments and changes as we move forward? This goes from the broadest, at the strategic thinking level, down into the specific day-to-day delivery of a plan. Comprehensive plans are attending to all three of these things, and this is from one of the other sessions, not in this. The other thing that's very important for churches to understand is the same group of people cannot be responsible for all those things at the same time. We need people who are gifted, systems thinkers, visionaries, who are very good at seeing things that aren't there, seeing things that could potentially be there. We need those people to do that strategic thinking. We need people who are the engineers, who know how to put things together, how to build things, how to create things, to be focusing in on that planning level. And then we need the doers. We need the helpers. We need the leaders. We need the hands-on people who have expertise and passions in specific areas to be working constantly on the tactical side. So we need to differentiate the kinds of leadership skills that are effective in all three of those areas. And if you're interested in that, invite me in to do another session of this so that we can look at how the process works. So, there are 7 key factors that I have identified out of my reading of the demographics and the survey data. Somebody else could look at exactly the same thing I have looked at and come up with completely different factors. So keep that in mind. But as I look at the things that are going to impact our churches, and specifically our camps in this next generation to come, 7 factors are age, music, multiculturalism, our facilities, technology, money, and specialization. Wisconsin is getting older. Has anyone noticed that? As we look at the projections for the next 25 years, one of the things we're going to note is the population in Wisconsin that is age 17 and under will drop from 15% to 11% of the total population. At the same time, 55 and older will increase from 13 to 19%. Almost 20% will be 55 and older. Young families, and families especially with young children, have the least amount of disposable income and discretionary time. 55 plus have the greatest amount of both. We are seeing a trend in the state of Wisconsin of retirement age in the 1970s was around 67. By the 1990s, it had dropped to about 63 and a half. We have 80% of our retirees today, 80% are retiring before age 60 in the state of Wisconsin. So we have people who are retiring earlier who have lots of specialized skill, knowledge, and experience, and time on their hands. So often I hear us talk about, oh, we're getting older, we're gray, and we're getting older as a church, and we say that as a bad thing. I want to turn it around and say there's some possibilities to it. Now, another impact, 29 and under in our state are more attracted to newer churches than they are to older and longer established churches. But hear this, this is significant. 29 and unders in the state of Wisconsin stay with the congregation, whether they join or not, for just under 24 months, 2 years, before they move on. There is such a mobility, and what we're going to see as the demographics are indicating right now is that young singles and young couples are getting their start in, more often than not, in urban settings. Then when they start to have children, they leave the state. And that's one of the reasons why the decrease in age is going to continue, is they're relocating out of the state as they have children. Part of the reason for that is, as families grow and financial demands increase, there are higher paying jobs in 38 states than in the state of Wisconsin. So they're following where the money will go. Now hear this. I say this now out loud, and I will reinforce it again. Am I saying we should then not be in ministry of children, youth, and young adults?
No.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. One of the myths that we have is sometimes when churches say, well, we'd love to build a ministry with young adults, young couples, young families. Their vision is a 1950s vision that these young people would come join the church and raise their kids in the congregation. They're going to stay there a good long time and have a 20-year or 30-year membership in the church. That's not the reality that we're living in. We need to look at ministry with young people and say, we've got maybe 2 years to make an impact on their lives. And if we do a good job of equipping them and empowering them to be leaders, we're equipping and empowering them to be leaders in someone else's church. Yeah, so there are a number of realities. Economics is a driver, always has been, always will be. And that's the second part of this, is 55 and older are more attracted to established churches. They will connect with churches that were around when they were younger, that are recognizable, that have some brand identity. And their average right now of people who are joining a church at midlife or older is that they stay with that church an average of 8.5 years. So you have an opportunity to establish community in a different way. One other phenomenon that right now I have yet to find that denominationally we really know how to deal with it is the designer spirituality orientation of 45 and under. And what I mean by that is probably the fastest growing trend that we're seeing in our culture today are young people who will worship in one church, have a small group in another church, maybe of a completely different denomination, who will go on mission trips with yet a third church, and will go and work for the soup kitchen of a fourth church. And they feel like they belong to all the churches, but they make no membership commitment to any of the churches. How does that fit into most of our strategies of attracting new members? And how are we really able to engage with that, where they find one thing that really works in their heart and life, but other things are not, that's not what they do with us. The other thing, which I'll touch back on again with worship as well, that we're seeing a shift. In the 20th century, worship was the primary entry point for most people coming into the United Methodist Church. That's no longer true. Churches that are growing and thriving, more people are coming in through a small group experience or a mission or service experience than are visiting worship first. They're forming relationships, they're getting engaged in ministries, and then, if they make the connection, they'll start coming to worship. We don't know how to do that either. We've made worship our kind of main entry into the church. So all of these things are shifting. What we often hear in the church is this lament that we're a graying church, that we're getting older, or we're not replacing our older members with younger members. What I want to lift up to you is just a possibility for conversation. And that is, what if, in certain areas, we would make a determination to specialize in and focus on adult, older adult, early retirement ministries. And that would become a strength and a focus. We wouldn't worry as much in certain areas about trying to compensate for a lack of children, a lack of youth, a lack of young adults. There are churches that are transforming themselves. And instead of wondering, how do we replace older members with younger members, we think in terms of how do we replace older members with other older members. Because the blessing is, we're always making more. There's a never-ending supply of older people. It is a growth industry, and it is important to understand that in the current census, 2 out of 5 people in the 55 and older category in the state of Wisconsin have no current church affiliation. 70% of that group call themselves Christian. And so there is an evangelical frontier of 55 and older who have no current church affiliation. Let me just ask a quick question. As you've been sitting here and listening to this, what are some of the questions or implications you see? What are some of the implications on your ministries, especially for the Board of Camp and Retreat Ministry? What are some of the questions you need to be wrestling with and exploring as you look at the future? Yeah, Steve?
Well, in Sheboygan we have 3 United Methodist churches. And we talked about cooperative or collaborative ministries where different functions take place in different churches. And to me it's almost like a throwback to tent or circuit ministry where at a certain time and place, you worship, but you might have this mission going on over here and this Sunday school going on over here. And I know logistically in the rural areas, it may be more difficult to do that, but it seems to me that that's a way to begin to look at dealing with these factors. Right?
Okay. So more collaboration, more sharing of resources, more interaction. Yeah. Dan, did you?
Well, it's just a lot of it is looking at the population in your own area.
Mm-hmm.
And you can say these broad things, but then
That's
what's
right.
going on in your own area, and what are people really looking for? And like you said, you don't know unless you start to talk to people and ask them. What are they looking for? What do they need? How do they want to participate? Do they want to participate?
Right. And this goes again to the issue that some people kind of say is insignificant. I think it's greatly significant. Our days of doing ministry for a group or offering a ministry to a group are behind us. Unless we are seeking ministry with various groups, we're probably not going to be very successful. That goes especially with racial ethnic population, and it goes with the younger adult population. Young adults are not interested in coming into our churches to be made like us. They're interested in finding community where they can be growing together, leading together, struggling together, really having some decision-making power to make their own successes and their own mistakes. And so many of our churches want them to come in.
I don't mind the front row.
Okay, good. Okay, of course. So many of our churches want younger people to come in, sit down, be quiet, and that's it.
Two things. I was in a church several years ago that looked like a healthy church. It had about 150 people show up and worship, lots of kids and young families and older folks, and we knocked our heads on the wall trying to get things done, and until we realized that for whatever reason, the hole in our demographics was in 55 to 65-year-olds. There was nobody there who actually had the time and money to do stuff. And the other thing that I think about here is the 55 to 65, maybe 70-year-olds that are active and able to do stuff. The tension there is helping them to figure out how to do things that aren't just targeted toward them, but actually can help serve the younger generations.
Yes.
And older generation.
As we're looking across, this is not just Wisconsin, we're looking across the sweep of the United Methodist Church in the United States today. Those churches that are the fastest growing older adult churches, their main focus is on quality of life, body, mind, and spirit. Where people feel that the church can help them achieve a better quality of life. That's incredibly attractive to the 55 and older. Once again, here are all of these things. I'm not necessarily saying these are good or bad, right or wrong things. I'm just saying that's what is currently. This is, once again, this is kind of crass, but it's meant to be descriptive of where we're heading. We're going to have a deeper level of socially conscious bleeding heart liberals coming into our churches out of that baby boom generation, that the other baby boomers are going to be perfectly happy for those people to do the ministries on their behalf. Because the other baby boomers, we love to send a check to pay somebody else to do the ministry that we think is really important to do. And so there's going to be that bridging connection where some of our churches will have phenomenal, what I call representational ministries, where a handful of people do the ministry for the whole church, and the whole church takes great pride in our ministry. And that will probably become more and more and more with the baby boom takeover as we move forward.
Just another question about the demographics. Distinguishing between 55 and older and the younger people, is there a difference in their approach to membership versus participation in a church?
That is more cultural and cross-generational now than it is tied to any generation. You have as many middle-aged and older, who are just not willing to make that commitment now than you've had before. And so, in some ways, there are some segments. It's not a matter, I kind of disagree with Robert Putnam's bowling alone methodology. I think he pointed something out, but made some erroneous conclusions. If you look at social networking as a joining phenomenon, we have people joining. We have joiners. What has shifted is not whether people will join or not. What has shifted significantly is on whose terms will we join. It used to be that the institution that offered the invitation to join set the terms. But now more and more, it is the person who accepts the invitation that sets the terms upon which they will participate. Think church. Prayers, presence, gifts, service, witness. Who decides what's enough? In our culture, people make the commitment, and then the church doesn't set the standards. The person who joined says, if I come once or twice a year, that's good enough. I'm fulfilling this. So I think that's cultural more than generational right now. Music. I'm going to say it again. I'm not saying what ought to be. I'm just sharing what is. We are seeing that music has become perhaps the most important factor determining where people worship. Much more than the quality of preaching. Much more than even the prevailing theology. Music is a determining factor, especially of first-timers deciding whether they will ever come back or not. And some of those factors are: 1 in 3 visitors to a church will not return if organ music is the primary form. 4 in 5 will not return if it's the only form. There is an exception to that. If you have a world-class organist guild, top-of-the-line equipment, performance level, organ and organist, the two have to be in combination.
With a drummer.
There are churches that are drawing people from far and wide because of their organ, because of their organism. There are 4 of those in the United Methodist. 4 growing churches that are growing because of their. So that's a tough one. But what we're doing is we're seeing that general shift. Frank?
Where's that come from? What this statistic?
There have been surveys of the Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Dakotas Protestant churches, and they break them down by denomination. So this is some of this has actually been done by a worship arts, ecumenical worship arts group.
Are you speaking United Methodist right now, or
Yes,
are you speaking
I'm speaking United Methodist. That was the United Methodist line out of that research. 3 and 5, Al, go ahead.
Does it, I don't know how to ask that question. Is it, and the types of music vary each week?
We're going to talk about types and styles and the impact of that.
Okay.
One thing I will, before we go on to the next one, do you know 1911 in Methodist churches, do you know what the primary form of music was in 1911? I just heard it. Guitar. Guitar. In 1916, there was a motion taken to General Conference to ban bar instruments, meaning pianos, from our sanctuaries. So music tastes and musical, what's appropriate and what's real church music has shifted quite a bit just in the last 100 years. And I thought we were getting away from it, but we're going back to it. I stopped using the term contemporary worship because if you know word usage and the meaning of words with the times or with the living is what contemporary means. If you're not doing contemporary worship, stop it. That's icky. You know, we need to be doing all of our worship with the living. So that alternative praise, there is a significant segment of people who are looking for contemplative worship. There are those who are looking for deeply engaged and interactive worship. And this is not just a matter of style preferences. This is a matter of we engage with God in different ways. Some people need silence in order to experience the divine. Other people, their hearts are lifted, their souls are lifted through wonderful music. We encounter God, we approach God in different ways. And so it's not just about style, but it is about those experiences. If we are truly serious about reaching people and connecting them to God, we've got to take responsibility that one size will not fit all. When I did the vital signs study, vital congregations, little church, pardon me, out in the panhandle of Oklahoma, Hardin, Oklahoma, church of 75 members, and this was back a decade ago, has 11 different worship services each week. They have a praise service, they have a traditional service, they have a Cherokee service, they have a Spanish language service, they have a communion service every week, they have a contemplative. Then they also have equipped their lay people to go and lead worship in the prison, in the nursing homes, in the hospitals, and once a month they lead a chapel service at the airport. This is a church of 75 members that has over 500 people in worship attendance every week, because they are reaching so many different audiences with meaningful worship. I'm not saying that's what everybody should do, but that's something that kind of goes along with that. Something significant, especially for churches that are trying to do effective praise worship. 3 in 5 visitors will not return to a church where music is performed poorly. The same number will not return if music is performed for them. New music must be taught. 90% of people want to sing songs they know, and if you're introducing new songs, teach them. One of the things about projecting things up on screens is it doesn't matter if you can read music when the only thing you project are the words. And sometimes it's a comedy routine in a praise service where nobody knows the words but the praise team. And I say this in all loving kindness, when someone on your praise team is a frustrated American Idol wannabe, you can't sing what they're singing no matter what you try to do. Because they're all over the map. Just really performing for God. People are turned off by that. People really want to sing. They want to be fully engaged. They want to be fully active in this worship experience. They do not like to have those where the level of engagement is you stand and clap along with songs you don't know. So the level of our choirs. Going back historically, Charles Wesley's instructions to the people called Methodists are very clear. The choir will never, must never, perform music for the congregation. The choir has one purpose. That's to lead the congregation in singing. Why was that so important? In the days of the early choirs, 50 to 70% of your congregation were illiterate. It didn't matter whether they had hymnals or not. People couldn't read. So the choir's function was to make sure that the whole people of God could raise their voices. That's changed. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have choirs that perform. But if we've got people who are leading singing, the people who are visiting our churches want to sing along. And they're making a decision about where to go to church on how well they are helped to participate and to sing. Here's where we get to what George was lifting up. Churches offering a diversity of styles will increase. Those featuring a single style will not. Those attempting to blend styles will decrease. We are seeing the end of blended worship. Blended worship is hard. And for most people, the definition of blended worship is sitting through something they hate in order to get to something they like. We may want to introduce people to new styles. We may want to try to loosen them up and get them. But that is all about style, not about a person's experience. If a person is thrust into an experience where the cognitive dissonance is so great that they cannot stay fully engaged, we're not doing them any favors. We're not helping them worship. What we are seeing is that the churches that recognize that there are different spirituality types, different approaches and experiences of God, and are offering a variety, those are the congregations that are currently growing. As our culture becomes more pluralistic, as our experiences become more diverse, the need for our opportunities to worship in different ways is going to increase. Now, this doesn't need to be thought of in the traditional sense of designing a worship service where the pastor has to preach at every service. Some of these worship experiences are very organic. Many of our most successful worship alternatives in some of our fast-growing churches are the worship experiences that have grown out of small groups, grown out of an Emmaus community, grown out of VIM group, that come back and they begin to offer a worship experience on a regular basis. So these can be organic, but more is going to be better in most cases than fewer. The multiculturalism in Wisconsin is going to be a mixed bag. Even though we're going to see great population shifts, we're going to see, with the exception of a few urban centers, most areas of the state where 90% are still going to be Euro, Caucasian, Anglo background, Upper European. And so our adjustment is going to be kind of all over the map and slow. Some of the issues in our urban settings and suburban settings, some of the areas like across the Dells where we're seeing a really large shift in the racial ethnic population. What happened here that was significant, that no one really predicted in the trends a generation ago, was that when all of the resorts in the Dells were summer resorts, we would have a population move in for 6 months of the year, and then they would leave during the winter months. Once we closed all the water parks and made these year-round, people began to move into the areas. And in the places where there were service opportunities, they've begun to generate some really sizable and impressive communities. And our churches weren't really equipped to reach out and connect. We're going to see the shift continue. Monoculture is ending. The idea that we're going to find churches where everybody's like everybody else is gone. And if we're looking to a future where we're going to grow a church full of people who are just like we are, we're kidding ourselves. those people who are just like us are already us. And the people who aren't in our churches aren't exactly like us. Non-Mexican Latinos will be the fastest growing non-Euro-Caucasian segment in the next 25 years.
That's in Wisconsin?
In Wisconsin, in our state. We are seeing a pipeline of Central and South American, primarily into our urban centers. But one thing, and I'll come back to this at the end, I'll spoil the ending at the beginning. We also really have to watch our stereotypes. When many churches think about Hispanic Latino population, they do think about some of the rural and poor Mexican families moving into service jobs. Our fastest growing populations are relocating urban professionals from South American, Central American cities, where these people have advanced degrees, they have professional expertise, they are among some of the best and brightest who are coming up and working in government, who are working in education, who are working in medicine. And so we need to kind of change our thinking when we talk about immigrant populations that have traditionally been thought of as lower income, lower education groups.
Well, I'd like to add to that because even on the face of it, it may look like these educated professionals are all working in high-level positions. I personally know several people who are here, highly educated, professional people who, because of the language barrier and this gap, are working in blue-collar or really lowly skilled jobs, and to discover the brilliance of mind and of skill level and education level is really stunning. And there are a lot of people in that situation.
They are.
And I just wanted to clarify that.
And the second fastest growing segment will be the Mexican immigrant populations. But and even this is simplistic, but the life experience, the needs and expectations of Mexican Americans that came out of a rural setting and came out of an urban setting are as different as night and day. And we can't just use labels and categories any longer as we think about who we're going to be administered with. There are between 50 and 70 different Hispanic Latino cultures present in the United States. By the end of this 25-year period, all of those cultures will be represented in the state of Wisconsin. So that level of diversity is going to increase. The churches, this is kind of a recommendation based on what we've seen across the denomination. For years, churches who have wanted to be in ministry with Hispanic and Latino populations have offered English as a second language. Time has come, if you're serious about being in ministry with Hispanic and Latino, you need to be offering your congregation Spanish as a second language. It's as important for us to learn to speak the language of the people we want to reach as it is to expect them to learn to speak our language. It's a hospitality thing. And as we look at the churches in the Rio Grande, California Conference, New York, New Jersey, and Florida, those churches that are growing fastest are the ones where they are focusing on helping the existing congregation become more sensitive and welcoming. Back in the early 80s, as you looked at our SAT scores and our ACT scores, it was noted that people from the Korean background, from the Japanese culture, from the Chinese culture, all surpassed middle-class American youth in their scores on the SATs and the ACTs. In 2010, urban Mexicans And most of the populations from Central America also move past and score higher on SATs and ACTs than Caucasian middle-class America. Technology. This is another one that's controversial, that I get resistance to, that people say yes, but, and once again, I'm not saying whether we ought to or not. I'm really talking about where the trend seems to be heading and what the evidence is. Modern tech is important. People will not attend a church that doesn't provide them with the bare minimum. What they're used to at home is what they expect at church. And so we are, whether we're consumeristic, whether that's good or bad, doesn't matter. People really do judge the quality based on the level of tech that we're using in the church right now. The real crisis for many churches is cutting-edge technology is so expensive and it changes every 32 seconds. If you're trying to get ahead of the curve, you're behind the curve just in the time it takes you to decide what to buy to stay ahead of the curve. And so there's this real kind of futility. What you need to do is determine specifically what is it you want to do well and what's the appropriate technology that will help you do it. And then use whatever your technology is to the very best of your ability. Sound and visuals become more important as churches age. Baby boomers are not the most patient, tolerant people in the world. We're the ones that say, I'll give you one chance to make a good impression. And if you don't, I can check out, I've got options. I can go other places. If you go back a decade, when we started to bring projectors and screens into our sanctuaries, the #1 source of resistance we had was from our older members in our church. Today, those that are promoting better tech, projection screens, in our churches are primarily our older people. Why? They can see it. It's great. They never knew how good it could be. Better sound, better visuals, makes the experience so much more pleasurable. And so, as boomers become our older generation, they're going to bring that boomer expectation on the level of quality technology. One of the things that is a cautionary word, and this has been shown over and over again, this is not just Wisconsin, it is better not to use technology than to use it poorly. If you use it poorly, you will drive people running and screaming out of your churches and they won't come back. One phenomenon we see in so many of our churches that we never saw before is, and this is not true in Wisconsin, but I'll bet we see it more and more in Wisconsin. And that is, if you look at the church calendar for the week to come, what you'll notice is Saturday afternoon is rehearsal. What are they rehearsing? Sunday morning. They're working through, when we look at staff positions in the church, production managers and professional tech are the two fastest growing church positions now. We've got folks that want to time this thing down, as more and more of our churches do broadcasting of their worship services. Got to have timing down. And so you see churches that are actually giving a full day to doing the rehearsal to make sure that they've got every PowerPoint slide just goes smooth as silk, nobody jumps around, nothing goes wrong. Websites are no longer optional. They are becoming essential and they will be essential. For people who are coming into a community, and this is across all ages now, those people who look for churches, 8 out of 10 look on the internet. 1 out of 10 look in newspapers, 1 out of 10 look in phone books. 8 out of 10, all ages, look for churches and information about community churches online.
25-year-old daughter tells me the other day, if an organization doesn't have a Facebook, it doesn't bother them.
Okay? And that's going to become more rather than less. Blogs, podcasts. It is interesting to me that if you look at active church websites in our fastest growing churches, the number one reason why people come to the website is to download the sermon podcast. People are busy, people can't be in worship, doesn't mean they're not interested. If you don't have podcast capabilities, if you're not doing a digital recording and putting it online, you're missing a lot of people, because that right now is the number one reason why people visit church websites, is to get the podcast of the sermon.
May I ask you, did you say a percentage of people about the podcast? Was that, I'm going to write that down.
It's just that when you look at the websites of churches and what we focus on as really the fast-growing and fast-growing churches, when people are visiting, the number one reason they're visiting is to get that podcast. So we're seeing more and more and more. The social networking, the Facebook. We've gone through, everything goes through a pendulum swing. People got kind of scared off by social networking, and we hear all the bad stories. We need more time to learn the good stories and learn how to use it. It's a tool. And if we learn how to use it, one of the things I've noted, this is not true, this is not Wisconsin, it's not just United Methodist camps. But if you look at the rise in social networking camps, blog camps, we're seeing more and more and more technology camps to bridge those two and to bring together the interests of the culture and a church filter through which we talk about how to do this well, how to do it appropriately, how to use it as a tool, and young people are eating up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that technology is one area where this is a great place if there is a younger person in the congregation. Usually that person may be oriented around the technology, gives them a job and a responsibility to be a consultant in an area of expertise. That is something that can be a really good generation connector.
You bet. That's the ministry with rather than the ministry for it. Just using technology to reach people is not enough. Using technology as a form of ministry together, that's great. When was the last time that someone said to you, now we're going to talk about money in the church as a good thing, as something to get excited about? In the next 25 years, what we're going to see is that the pool of discretionary disposable assets in the United States of America, including Wisconsin, will hit a peak somewhere between 2021 and 2027. We're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars in the hands of Americans where they will want to be channeling a significant portion of that into charitable work. The nonprofits who receive the gifts are those who will ask for them. If you are not doing charitable giving and planned giving in your congregation, start now. Cultivate, because people are going to be looking for more and more meaningful, safe, responsible investment opportunities where they can do good work with their money. Churches focusing on planned giving, building endowments today will benefit the most. Monies for missional initiatives will be easier to cultivate than monies for building and property. This is a generational cultural shift. The GI and builder generations were very much into bricks and mortar. They loved their churches, they loved their buildings, they loved their stained glass, they loved the organ. They would put money into the church plant in order to make it better. Boomers will continue to do that for one driving reason and one driving value alone, and that's comfort. We will spend money on whatever makes us more comfortable. But the driving vision for charitable giving with people who are currently 60 and younger in our culture is mission and service. We want our dollars to do good for other people. So, mission initiatives would be the main thing. Investment in the future will trump maintenance every time. We have a generation of people who are going to be a little fickle. They are not as attracted to older, run-down buildings as we are. You know, I just love an old, run-down building. I guess it doesn't make sense. But anyway, propping up what is falling down is not going to be motivational as we move into the future. That's another thing as looking at our facilities and talking about, are we in the place where we need to be in order to do the ministry and the work? We're going to have to get serious about those conversations. Good stewardship of church resources will become a top priority, but the trend will be toward more rather than less. Churches that are really cultivating some specialized ministry focus where they're asking people to invest, to give, to make endowments, to remember the church in their will. We're going to actually have church meetings a decade from now where we spend our time asking the question, well, what do we do with all this money? How many of you don't believe me? We're heading that way. If we ask, if we get smart about inviting and cultivating the giving now. I'm working with the foundation. We're going to be doing more and more help work to help churches do this and to understand how to do this. But we're heading for a time of the most charitable giving we've had in a long time. Now that does not mean we're talking about an increase in week-to-week plate giving. We're talking about the giving to capital change, to capital initiatives. Last thing, specialization. This is a trend that is more cyclical than linear. We go through phases back and forth, and this is where we're moving toward a specialized phase of ministry. Most of our United Methodist churches cannot go toe-to-toe with the mega church. We can't do a lot of things well. And so, what we're seeing is that the healthiest churches are excelling in one or two key ministries. It's not that we don't do a variety of things, but the churches are asking the question, were we to be able to do one ministry better than anything else? If we were to become world-class, that we would be known throughout the community and the conference for a ministry, what would that ministry be? And that's the question that some of our strongest churches today, denominationally, are asking. And Wisconsin, I think, can benefit from the same thing. We are connectional, supposedly, ideally. And so what we need to be doing are looking at those specific things that we can do better than anything else. Greater intra-denominational and ecumenical partnerships and support are the wave of the future. One of the trends that we've seen for the last decade is that our strongest churches are intentionally planning ministries that are too big for them to do alone. They cannot, if we look at a community and say, how do we deal with the needs of the homeless? There's no one congregation that has the resources necessary to meet that need. And so they're saying, we've got to be working with other congregations that have that passion, with other denominations that have that passion, with the community groups that have that passion. And together, synergy occurs. We can do together what's impossible for us to do on our own. That's intentional. That's part of the planning. Pastoral partnerships are necessary. Networks of specialists could be a model for circuit ministry, where we look together, and what Steve said earlier is we've got, in an area where we may have 3 churches that are all struggling, could it be possible that we can envision a collaborative ministry where one of those churches could be a world-class worship center? One of those churches could be a world-class spiritual formation center. And one of those churches could be world-class at community service and outreach. And so together we are a stronger affiliation than any one of our churches could be on their own. We see this trend more and more, and in a time of struggling resources, until we get to that point where we have more resources than we know what to do with, we need to get more strategic of what are some of the partnerships. One of the places I see this with camps is that there are more and more shared affiliations where a camp and a community organization co-sponsor things and do those kinds of events. Witness and reputation should become planning priorities. And what I mean by that is we should be asking the question constantly, what do we want to be known for? The last church I served, when I was the pastor, I'd go into town, I would introduce myself as, hi, I'm Dan Dick, pastor of the Colesville United Methodist Church, and immediately people would say, ooh, you're the chicken and biscuit church. Well, we had a reputation. There wasn't the reputation I wish we had been known for. And so, what do we want to be known for? How do we want the community to understand us? Same can be true for local churches, for circuits, for camps. Think one big thing at a time. Most of our churches truly can do anything they want, but they cannot do everything they want. The days of trying to offer a little of everything and settling for a baseline of mediocrity really isn't going to distinguish us from anybody else. And so if we can say there are certain things that we can't do very well, we may offer, we may eliminate them in order that we can really specialize in a couple areas. Make excellence, depth, a greater priority than reach, breadth. Getting a whole lot of new people to come isn't any good if you don't have something for them to connect with once they get there. And so to really have an identity, to really be able to say, if a church has a reputation for being a real missional outreach church, people know what they're saying yes or no to from day one. So the summary, very quickly. In 2035, in Wisconsin, we'll be older, more diverse, wealthier, in smaller facilities with cutting-edge tech supporting high-quality music and worship arts, collaborating in specialized ministries, or else we'll be gone. These are just some of the things that it looks like the trend is moving in these directions. The key role of leadership is how do we help people see these not as threats, but as opportunities? How do we see that these changes are things that are really going to happen whether we like them or not? But that doesn't mean that they're bad things. That we have so many opportunities as these things shift to be more effective in the ministries we are already doing and to be creative in the new ministries that God is calling us to. So, thank you for this time.